While the whole country was glued to their televisions, hypnotized by O.J. Simpson pacing back and forth in a courtroom drama turned national soap opera, 3 other trials were grinding forward in the shadows. No cameras, no cheers, no primetime breaks. One in Los Angeles, one in New York, one in Atlanta. Different courtrooms, same heartbeat. All 3 revolved around one name, Erick Bozeman. If those trials had been broadcast the way O.J.'s was, they might have stolen the spotlight. Maybe even crushed the ratings. This wasn't a celebrity fall from grace story. This was a power story, a money story, a government versus the street story. And the feds knew it. Before the cases even cracked open, U.S. Attorney Kent B. Alexander stood tall and bragged to the press. He called it one of the biggest prosecutions they'd ever touched, one of the most sophisticated. That was his word, sophisticated. The kind of word they use when they're impressed but still want your head. The FBI said they had over 1,100 wiretaps. 1,100 conversations peeled straight off the air. They claimed they heard Boseman casually ordering up to 300 pounds of cocaine at a time, talking directly to sources in Colombia on a cell phone like he was ordering office supplies. But that wasn't even the part that really shook them. What made their eyes widen was the lifestyle leaking through those calls. They said they heard him gambling in Vegas, winning 50 bands like it was pocket change. They said they heard him spending $150,000 a month just moving around, planes, restaurants, business, luxury. They talked about a stay at some elite Hawaiian resort so expensive it made federal agents uncomfortable just listening. One official admitted it straight. The price tag alone freaked them out, said it'd take them a lifetime to spend money like that. Erick Bozeman came up out of South Central California, not born into privilege, born into heat. Now the government was calling him the architect of an operation that pushed cocaine coast to coast, hidden inside hollowed-out computers, slick and quiet. They said he washed the money through shell corporations, paper companies that didn't exist in real life, then slid the cash offshore where the law couldn't grab it. According to them, the machine pulled in more than $30 million in just 2 years. The indictment painted a wide map: Memphis, Jackson, Baltimore, D.C., Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland. Not one at a time, but all at once, simultaneous motion. Records showed Boseman keeping homes everywhere: Manhattan's East Side, Chicago's Lakeshore Drive, Buckhead in Atlanta, Miami's South Beach. He moved like smoke. New address, new identity, no hesitation. When someone asked where he actually lived, an official shrugged and said it plain: wherever he felt like living. Most of the 50 people caught up in the case folded. Over half took deals, cut agreements, signed their names, and handed over stories. Erick didn't. He did the one thing nobody advised, nobody expected, nobody sane would recommend. He fired his lawyers and stood up for himself. Pro se, his own mouth, his own mind, his own defense in federal court. The charges were heavy: conspiracy, money laundering, and the crown jewel, an 848 Kingpin charge dropped in Atlanta federal court alongside 2 co-defendants from Chicago and D.C. The room didn't know what it was about to witness. Erick turned that courtroom into theater. Not flashy, not clownish, something colder, something sharper. Even the lawyers sitting beside him didn't know what hit them. When he opened his mouth, it wasn't denial, it was indictment. He told the jury they were players in a government game, said he planned to expose it, said he wasn't there to imitate Johnny Cochran or F. Lee Bailey, said he came armed with reason and logic, not tricks. Then he went straight for the throat. He laughed at the so-called war on drugs, called it a long-running campaign with different costumes, said it started back in 1619 with chained Africans, said it wore the face of legal slavery, then Jim Crow, then apartheid, then lynching dressed up as social order. The prosecutor jumped up fast, objecting, said race had nothing to do with the case, said he needed to stick to evidence. Erick didn't blink. He said the law itself was breaking the law, entrapment dressed up as justice, said the evidence would show right and wrong didn't matter to the government at all, said anybody could commit any crime and walk clean if they agreed to cooperate, said government witnesses weren't witnesses at all, they were hostages. Then he turned it inward. He told the jury that when he was first arrested in Los Angeles, the government offered him a deal, a job, told him he was young, told him his life was ahead of him, asked him to plead, inform, help lock up everybody he knew. He said they call that cooperation. He called it selling your soul. Said he refused, and that refusal made him a hostage too. He didn't pretend innocence, didn't insult their intelligence. He admitted involvement, admitted profit, but he framed it differently. Said he was born into an urban war zone where money and survival were the only laws that mattered. Compared himself to Wall Street brokers who stole millions and paid fines or nothing at all, said they went home, said he didn't have $6 million to buy his freedom, said regular taxpayers paid for those crimes while men like him paid with their lives. He told them flat out, he wasn't a drug dealer, he wasn't a kingpin. Then he closed it the way fighters close fights. He reminded them how Ali's bouts had names, big names, historic names, and he gave this trial one of its own. We the people don't believe the hype. And just like that, the room went quiet. When asked why he chose to stand alone in federal court, Erick Bozeman's answer traced back to a book that landed in his hands days after his arrest, the autobiography of Assata Shakur. That text didn't just influence him, it hardened him. The strength, the refusal to bow, the way Assata turned an unjust trial into a battleground of ideas. Bozeman absorbed that lesson fully. He decided that if the courtroom was going to be his cage, then it would also be his stage. He believed the so-called war on drugs was never about drugs at all, but about black bodies, black neighborhoods, and control. Representing himself wasn't arrogance, it was necessity. No lawyer trying to keep a license intact would ever dare say what he intended to say out loud. From the outside looking in, it was clear he never believed in saviors wearing suits. His view of lawyers had already been soured long before trial. Years of hiring them taught him one brutal truth in his mind. Federal court eats almost everyone alive. A 95% conviction rate didn't sound like justice to him. It sounded like a rigged casino. He believed brothers needed to stop putting blind faith in attorneys and start understanding the machine they were walking into. During pre-trial, when he argued a motion poorly by his own admission, the prosecutors laughed. They thought they were watching a fool warm up before a quick execution. They thought the trial would be a joke. What they didn't realize was that Boseman wasn't rehearsing for them. He was studying the room. He never sat down with co-counsel to map strategy. This was his life on the line, not theirs. He set the tone, the pace, the direction. When opening statements came, nobody, not even the lawyers sitting next to him, knew what was coming. The laughter stopped, the smiles vanished. In that moment, Erick Bozeman stopped being funny to the prosecution. The investigation that eventually swallowed him didn't even start with drugs. It began quietly, far away in Los Angeles, as a money laundering case run by the IRS. From there, it spread like oil across concrete. Nationwide indictments, coordinated arrests, a full federal sweep. Bozeman himself couldn't be found. Only a handful of people even knew how to reach him. One of them was a man he considered family. That call sealed everything. He went down to a hotel lobby to return it. The line was already burning, traced. The name he gave wasn't spoken with anger alone. It came with something heavier, betrayal. Marvin Epps. A man he said was closer than close, not a friend, a brother, someone he'd known his entire life. To Bozeman, there was only one word for it, treason. In his world, that kind of betrayal wasn't rare anymore. It was becoming routine. When Bozeman stood for his closing argument, he didn't posture. He thanked the jury first, acknowledged the slow grind of the past 2 weeks, reminded them that while it might have been tedious for them, it was his freedom, his future, his life sitting on the scale. He apologized to the women on the jury for the language they were forced to hear on the tapes, said it wasn't meant for them, but it was the language of the environment he came from. To the men, he brushed it off, said they'd heard worse in locker rooms. Then he reached back into memory, talked about the first time he touched real money, about going back to his grandmother's house, about her looking him dead in the eye and telling him to stop whatever he was doing. He pointed out a woman on the jury who reminded him of her, said she'd lived long enough to recognize truth from lies, and if he stood there lying, she'd know it instantly. He reminded them of the promises he made at the start. No insults to their intelligence, no smoke and mirrors. He said this trial was never about right or wrong. It was about capitalism, about brokering, about survival. He repeated that he sold no drugs in Atlanta or Georgia, that the case boiled down to one thing. The government wanted him to snitch, wanted him to work for them. And when he refused, they came for everything. He told them straight, this was a jury trial about truth, about evidence, and just as important, about the absence of evidence. He slowed them down on reasonable doubt. Those little pauses in the mind, I guess, it could be that space where certainty collapses. Every time he tried to peel back the layers, he said, the prosecution objected, over and over. He asked the obvious question, if there was nothing to hide, why block the full story? When he touched the continuing criminal enterprise charge, he made it clear how heavy it was. Life without parole. The prosecution leapt up again, trying to shut that door before the jury could even look through it. He dismantled the claims about wealth piece by piece, vacations, millions, bank accounts. He pointed out that no one had testified to seeing those accounts, no paper, no proof. Then he attacked the wiretaps. 1,100 tapes existed. The jury heard 400. If every conversation was criminal, why not play them all? He said the tapes caught everything: family, women, everyday life. That's why they weren't played. He pointed to one tape struck by the judge, misinterpreted as criminal, when he said it was about Snoop Dogg and a music contract. Interpretation, not fact. He pressed the missing witnesses: Nina Stewart, Bronwyn Burroughs, people available to testify, people who signed plea deals, people the government chose to speak about instead of letting speak for themselves. He asked why truth needed interpretation when witnesses could be put on the stand. He ended where he began, on evidence and what wasn't there. And every time he got close to tearing the curtain down, the same words cut him off. Objection, Your Honor. From the outside, the picture was clear. Erick Bozeman didn't go to trial trying to escape responsibility. He went to war with the narrative. And whether anyone believed him or not, he made sure one thing was undeniable: the government was no longer laughing. From the outside, what happened next stunned the courthouse and embarrassed the government in real time. The jury disappeared behind closed doors for 4 long days. When they finally came back, they didn't deliver the knockout the prosecution had been promising from day one. Instead, the jury hung on the Kingpin charge. No conviction, no clean win, just deadlock. For the government, it was a public stumble. For Erick Bozeman, it was proof that the machine wasn't invincible. The fallout was immediate. Reporters swarmed. Camera crews lined the halls. National media wanted a piece of the moment. Even Dan Rather tried to get FaceTime with Boseman the day before sentencing, but officials shut that down. CBS ran the story anyway. The headlines hit hard and fast, splashed across papers coast to coast. Californian acquitted of 5 big drug charges. A black man standing alone without a lawyer, facing the full weight of the federal system and peeling off some of the biggest charges in front of a jury of his peers. That alone rattled people. Now everybody waited for the hammer. Sentencing was coming, and the whole country knew it. All eyes shifted to the bench. Judge Clarence Cooper, himself an African American, was suddenly under a spotlight he didn't ask for. The courtroom wasn't just a room anymore, it was a stage. Every word mattered. When sentencing began, Judge Cooper laid it out cold and legal for the record. Counts 2 and 10 carried 10 years to life each, plus the possibility of $4 million fines. Count 28 carried 20 years and up to a $500,000 fine. According to the guidelines, the custody range was life. Then Boseman stood up. Before the sentence dropped, he made 2 requests. First, he asked to be designated to USP Atlanta. Then he asked for the floor, his last words before what he called death by incarceration. 18 months earlier, he reminded the court he had stood in that same room and said he would represent himself. Back then, the room laughed. The judge smiled. Clerks stared. Prosecutors nearly fell out of their chairs, already counting a quick and easy victory. They thought it was a joke. It wasn't. Boseman said that after that moment, he sought help from an African-American law firm and quietly began building his strategy in his own head. He said it rested on clear pillars. First, being judged by a jury of his peers. Second, exposing what he saw as the hypocrisy and unchecked power of the prosecution starting from the day of his arrest, when agents themselves testified that the FBI had asked him to work for them. Third, showing how far the government was willing to go, breaking its own rules to get what it wanted. Fourth, laying bare how right and wrong become irrelevant when someone is facing massive time and the prosecutor holds the power to forgive crimes in exchange for cooperation. He told the court the truth of the situation wasn't moral, it was economic, that drug laws were draconian, that they were racist in effect and design. And more than anything, he said the jury system was supposed to represent something bigger than guilt or innocence. He said the people were supposed to have power over the government, to pardon, to reject, to change unjust laws. Instead, he said that power had been handed over to lobbyists, lawmakers with private agendas, and economists serving corporate interests while the average American got crushed underneath. He told the judge that the jury had a rare opportunity to tell America enough, to say punishment was warranted, but life was not. By then, he noted, the judge himself had become a public figure. The media was watching. What Boseman called agents of propaganda were waiting to hear how the story would end. He pointed back to the jury's decision, calling it an earthquake inside the federal building. He said the prosecution's case was built on speculation and assumption, not first-hand testimony. He asked the obvious question, how does the government present the biggest drug case Atlanta had ever seen without producing a single witness to directly confirm the alleged activities? Then he turned to the criticism that followed the verdict. He pushed back hard against the claim that he had played the race card. He said it was insulting to suggest that black jurors were incapable of making rational decisions grounded in their own reality and lived experience. Before sitting down, he delivered one final salute to those who refused to cooperate with the government in exchange for freedom. His words were simple and sharp: death before dishonor. Judge Cooper responded without heat, but without mercy. He acknowledged Bozeman's intelligence, said he didn't understand why someone with that level of ability chose a life trafficking drugs, said it was regrettable, said it upset him to see a man act as though he was being punished for nothing wrong, said it took nerve for someone accused of so much to put everyone else on trial. Then the sentence came down. Pursuant to the Sentencing Reform Act of 1984, Erick Bozeman was committed to the custody of the Bureau of Prisons. Life imprisonment on counts 2 and 10, 20 years on count 28, all to be served concurrently. Just like that, the room went quiet. The jury may have shaken the building, but the system still closed its fist. From the outside looking in, Bozeman broke it down like this. The verdict, he said, wasn't just a win. It was a warning shot aimed straight at the government, a victory wrapped inside an alarm. He explained that most jurors, especially black jurors, walk into federal court with no real understanding of how brutal the sentencing structure actually is. They don't know the numbers. They don't know the weight. And if they did, many of them would refuse to be a part of what he called a legalized lynching. That blind spot, he said, wasn't an accident. It was the cornerstone of his defense, and it played out exactly the way he calculated. He went in facing 29 counts. When the dust settled, the jury only convicted him on 3. He admitted he broke court rules by telling the jury what certain charges really carried: mandatory life. He did it anyway. And after the verdict, the jury made their position crystal clear. They refused to put their name on any conviction that automatically meant life in prison. That was their line in the sand. But that line didn't hold. Once the case moved into sentencing, Bozeman said the rules changed again. The government leaned on something called preponderance of the evidence. In plain terms, that meant the judge could still pin actions on him. Old allegations, past arrests, similar accusations, even if a jury had already said not guilty. No conviction required, no unanimity needed, just enough smoke to justify the fire. That process, he said, stripped the jury of its final say. It erased their collective voice, the one that had already spoken loud and clear. He's not guilty of what you charged him with. That's how his sentencing guidelines were quietly inflated after the fact. He pointed to the work of Regina Austin and Paul Butler, 2 black legal scholars who had written openly about this imbalance. Their argument, as he described it, was that black jurors shouldn't just weigh evidence. They should resist certain laws altogether, ignore them, refuse to enforce them, especially drug laws. The concept had a name: jury nullification. That, Bozeman said, was the deeper fight. Now locked down, he teaches black studies inside Edgefield Federal Correctional Facility. He teaches men who came into the system never knowing their history, never being told their value, never being shown their worth before the cage closed behind them. And the message he leaves behind stays the same, unchanged, unsoftened, uncompromising, to his family, to his comrades, to the conscious and the unconscious prisoners of war. Death before dishonor. Victory is the only option.